Chapter 1: Echoes of the Deep. The rain on Mars was a sickly ochre, a consequence of the iron oxide dust whipped up by the thin, perpetually agitated atmosphere. It wasn't a gentle, cleansing rain. It was a gritty, abrasive assault, coating everything in a rusty film. Inside the reinforced viewport of the Icarus, a freighter repurposed as a survey vessel, Captain Elias Thorne barely noticed. He was too busy wrestling with the sensor readings, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. "Still nothing, Lieutenant Chen," he growled, his voice roughened by recycled air and a decade of command. Just the usual atmospheric anomalies and scattered metallic signatures. "The Council is going to have a field day with this report." Chen, a young, eager officer barely out of the academy, adjusted the spectral analyzer. "Sir, the gravitational distortion is intensifying. It's not consistent with any known geological activity. The readings are spiking, but they're not localized to any specific point." Thorne grunted. "Spikes don't conquer worlds, Chen. Let's stick to the original mandate: survey the potential resource deposits in the Argyre Basin. The Council's got bigger fish to fry, apparently. That Hollowborn infestation, it's burning a hole in their pocketbook." The Hollowborn. The word tasted like ash in Thorne's mouth. 2 weeks ago, humanity had been a cautious, contained anomaly, a technological backwater tolerated by the Galactic Council because of its perceived threat level. Now, the Council was scrambling. Their meticulously constructed defenses, the Void Net, a shattered ruin. The Hollowborn, a creeping tide of ethereal shadow beings, had rendered the Council's elegant Aether-Glass fleet utterly useless. Their ships, shimmering extensions of starlight, had dissolved into wisps of nothingness, devoured by the insidious creatures. The Icarus was one of the last vessels to escape the Sol Exclusion Zone before the Council, in a desperate scramble, established a new perimeter around the Sol system, a pathetic, ragged line of defense against a foe that didn't adhere to the laws of physics. Thorne, a veteran of countless skirmishes in the fringe systems, hadn't expected a massacre. Had expected a stalemate, a slow, grinding attrition war. Had been wrong. "Sir," Chen's voice was sharper now, laced with something beyond alarm. "I'm detecting a structure. Massive. It's buried deep beneath the surface, but the gravitational readings, they're almost overwhelming." Thorne activated the long-range scanners, pulling up the holographic projection. The data coalesced into a jagged, impossibly large shape, a dark stain on the already desolate Martian landscape. It was colossal, easily the size of a small moon. It wasn't a natural formation. It was manufactured. "Run a structural analysis," Thorne commanded, his hand instinctively moving to the activation switch for the Icarus' heavily shielded magnetic coil system. "Let's see what the Council didn't bother to report." The analysis took an agonizingly long time, the sensors straining against the overwhelming interference. The readings returned, displaying a bewildering set of data: extreme density, a complex internal structure composed of materials beyond any known alloy, and most unsettling, a level of temporal distortion that defied explanation. The object was ancient, impossibly ancient. It's nature. It's a herabment. A battleship. But it's not like anything we've ever seen. The materials there, as if they were forged in the heart of a dying star. As if to punctuate the realization, the ground beneath the Icarus shuddered. The ship lurched violently, throwing Thorne against the control panel. The holographic projection flickered, then stabilized, revealing a new, horrifying detail. The massive object wasn't just buried. It was moving. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the behemoth began to rise from beneath the Martian surface, its jagged outline emerging from the ochre dust and swirling wind. It was a darkness against darkness, an impossible silhouette sculpted from something akin to obsidian and solidified nightmares. And then, with a grinding, tectonic groan that resonated through the ship's hull, the first of its immense angled plates shifted. Thorn felt a primal, instinctive terror grip him. This wasn't a ghost ship, a relic of a long-dead civilization. This was something active. "Shields to maximum!" he barked, his voice tight with suppressed dread. "All hands, prepare for contact. This changes everything." He didn't need to say it. The universe, it seemed, was about to reset. The echoes of the deep, long dormant, had just awakened. And humanity, in its fragile technological arrogance, was about to learn just how insignificant it truly was. Chapter 2. The Iron Rain. The initial hours after the Anvil's emergence were a chaotic ballet of desperate calculations and futile attempts at communication. The Council's command ships, scattered across the Red Line, reported the same impossible reality, a vessel of colossal scale, defying both physics and the known composition of matter, had risen from the depths of Mars. Initial scans revealed no discernible propulsion system, no power signature beyond a faint, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to vibrate through space itself. It was simply there. Admiral Kalen, a veteran of countless skirmishes in the volatile Orion Arm, was a man forged in the crucible of battle. Had seen hope flicker and die 1,000 times, and currently he felt nothing but a cold, brutal assessment. "Silence all chatter," he commanded, his voice a low growl over the comms. "Initiate Protocol Obsidian. This requires a response unlike anything we've ever prepared for." Protocol Obsidian was a contingency plan developed during the early days of the Voidborn threat, a scorched earth approach designed to maximize damage output against a completely unknown enemy. It hinged on overwhelming force, employing weapons that bypassed conventional defenses and relied on sheer kinetic energy. The Icarus, Chen's battered scout ship, was repositioned alongside the lead Council vessel, the Argos. From their vantage point, the Anvil remained a terrifying spectacle. A brutal testament to a power far exceeding their comprehension. The ship's movement was unsettlingly precise, a deliberate, almost predatory grace. It wasn't simply rising, it was observing, as if cataloging the chaotic collection of ships that had dared to intrude upon its awakening. "Atmospheric analysis," Chen barked, frantically monitoring his scanners. "Anything anomalous?" "Negative, Captain," Lieutenant Ramirez responded, his voice strained. "Standard Martian atmosphere. Slight magnetic distortion consistent with the ship's presence." Kalen dismissed the triviality of the atmospheric readings. "Focus on the target." "Thorn, how are the targeting arrays adjusting?" "Locked on, Admiral." Thorn's voice crackled with controlled urgency. "The ship's geometry is irregular. It's not designed for conventional targeting. But the sensors are compensating. We're accounting for the distortion, predicting its movements with an accuracy of 0.02 seconds. That 0.02 seconds was the difference between a glancing blow and a catastrophic breach. "Lock targets," Kalen's voice rumbled over the emergency channel, heavy with the weight of 4G acceleration. "Give them the Iron Rain." The order triggered a cascade of activity. The Argos and the Icarus, along with a squadron of smaller, agile hunter ships, unleashed their primary armament, not lasers, not plasma, but thousands of dumb slugs. Each slug was a 10-ton projectile, meticulously crafted from tungsten alloy and propelled by magnetic coils to a terrifying 0.15 C. They were designed to punch through shields, tear through armor, deliver a kinetic punch that would pulverize even the most advanced defenses. The Hollowborn, initially a scattered swarm, reacted with terrifying speed. They didn't attempt to evade, they simply shifted, dissolving into shimmering wisps of shadow as the first slugs impacted. But the Iron Rain continued, relentless and unwavering. The slugs slammed into the ghostly forms, momentarily disrupting their cohesion, but they didn't dissipate. They simply absorbed the impact, transforming the kinetic energy into a destructive force. The Council observers watched in paralyzed shock as the tanky M-Titan simply accelerated, its massive prow acting as a physical battering ram. The anvil plowed through the unstoppable hollow-born fleet, shattering their shadow ships into clouds of harmless ash through sheer mechanical force. Target designation, Unit 734. Engaging, Ramirez shouted as a hunter ship unleashed a volley of slugs. The effect was immediate and brutal. A swirling vortex of shadow erupted where Unit 734 had been, followed by a brief flash of iridescent light, the remnants of a shattered reality. The anvil didn't show any signs of being damaged. It continued its inexorable advance, its dark hull a silent, unyielding wall against the onslaught. Kalen watched, his expression unreadable. He adjusted the targeting parameters, compensating for the ship's irregular movements, refining the trajectory of the slugs. Increase slug velocity by 5%. Hold steady. As the Icarus and Argos continued to unleash their iron rain, a new realization dawned on Thorn. The slugs weren't simply causing damage, they were disrupting the hollow-born. He analyzed the sensor data, his fingers flying across the control panel. "Admiral," he said, his voice strained, "the energy signatures of the hollow-born are fluctuating. It's as if the kinetic impact is interfering with their ability to maintain a cohesive form. They're losing density." Kalen nodded grimly. "They're fragile. We're exploiting a fundamental weakness. Maintain the assault. Let's see how they react to a concentrated barrage." The anvil responded with chilling efficiency. It angled its massive prow towards the Argos, a dark, looming shadow against the dust-filled sky. The tank-aimed Dreadnought was moving faster now, its momentum building with each passing second. The Admiral looked into the Council's feed, his face scarred and his eyes cold. "You called us Deathworlders to justify the cage," he said, the tank-aimed Dreadnought's fusion vents glowing a fierce radioactive orange behind him. "We used that cage to build something that doesn't break. The void net is down. We're the ones holding the hammer now." Chapter 3. The Price of Stone. The Council's holographic projection flickered, a fractured mosaic of the anvil's brutal ballet. The Argos, battered and listing, was a pathetic smear of ionized gas and shattered plating, its own iron rain cannons rendered useless by the sheer, overwhelming force of the anvil's counterattack. The Hollowborn, once a swarm of terrifying shadows, were now scattered remnants, coalescing and dissolving in a desperate, chaotic dance. Thorn watched, a knot of icy dread tightening in his stomach. Kalen's assessment wasn't just accurate, it was terrifyingly elegant in its devastation. "Adjust slug trajectory to prioritize cluster disruption," Kalen commanded, his voice a low growl amplified by the ship's comms. "Target the newly formed agglomerations. They're exhibiting heightened energy signatures." The Icarus and Argos, crippled but defiant, responded with renewed ferocity. Thorn, a veteran systems analyst with a reputation for cold logic and a healthy respect for the unpredictable, worked with a frantic urgency. He was feeding Kalen data in real time, charting the Hollowborn's erratic movements, calculating optimal slug trajectories. The initial paralysis was giving way to a grim understanding humanity hadn't just won a battle, they discovered a horrifyingly effective weapon against a being of pure, intangible energy. "Admiral, the anvil's momentum is accelerating exponentially," Thorn reported, his voice tight. "It's as if the tungsten hull is feeding on the kinetic energy of its own attacks. The ship's internal stresses are increasing. We're approaching critical density." Kalen didn't respond immediately. The silence was broken only by the relentless clang of the anvil's massive weapon systems, a metallic symphony of destruction. Finally he spoke, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Understood. Initiate emergency structural reinforcement protocols. Divert 70% of auxiliary power to the hull plating. Maintain offensive posture. Let them learn what stone truly is." The ensuing minutes were a blur of calculated violence. The anvil, a colossal, brooding leviathan, continued its relentless advance. It wasn't simply smashing through the hollow-born, it was systematically dismantling them, each impact triggering a cascade of disintegration. Thorn meticulously analyzed the energy readings, discovering a chilling pattern. The kinetic energy wasn't just damaging the shadows, it was fundamentally altering their structure. It was, in effect, shattering them. "Admiral, the energy signatures are shifting again," Thorn shouted, his fingers a blur over the console. "The hollow-born aren't just losing density, they're reverting. They're exhibiting characteristics of a solidified state. It's like we're forcing them into a form they can't sustain." This revelation sent a ripple of controlled panic through the Icarus. The Council's analysts, accustomed to dealing with the ethereal, were utterly bewildered. The thought of a being of pure shadow being subjected to physical force, being compressed, was anathema to everything they understood about the universe. Kalen's response was immediate and brutal. "Increase slug velocity by another 10%. Target the core formations, the larger, denser conglomerates. We're not just destroying them, we're stabilizing them. Make them understand the definition of oblivion." The effect was instantaneous. The remaining hollow-born, already weakened and fractured, began to collapse into shimmering, unstable masses. The air around the anvil crackled with residual energy, a tangible manifestation of the destruction. Thorn, his face slick with sweat, monitored the situation with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction. Suddenly, a new signal flared on the sensors, a massive energy pulse originating from the anvil itself. It wasn't a weapon, it was a probe. The probe, a stream of focused kinetic energy, pierced the remaining remnants of the hollow-born fleet, probing, analyzing, "Admiral, the probe is exhibiting anomalous readings," Thorn shouted, his voice strained. "It's detecting resonance. The anvil is absorbing their energy. It's feeding on their disintegration." Kalen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something akin to triumph crossing his face. "That's the key. They aren't just fragile. They're a source of energy. We're not just destroying them, we're consuming them. Continue the assault. Let's see how much they can withstand before they simply vanish." As the Icarus and Argos continued to unleash the iron rain, Thorn noticed something else, something far more unsettling. The anvil's fusion vents, previously glowing with a radioactive orange, were shifting. They were pulsing with a deeper, richer color, a violet that seemed to drink the light. And the voice of Admiral Kalen, filtered through the comms, was subtly different. It was deeper, resonating with a power that was undeniably ancient. "The stars caged the Deathworlders," Kalen said, his voice echoing with a chilling certainty. "But humanity's massive dreadnoughts woke to shatter the void. Now, we sleep with the stone." The violet glow intensified, and Thorn realized, with a sickening certainty, that the anvil wasn't just a weapon. It was something more. Something that had been waiting, for eons, in the cold, dark heart of the void. Chapter 4. Stone and Shadow. The violet pulse from the anvil wasn't a malfunction, it was a resonance. Thorn, now hunched over the Argos sensor array, recognized the shift not with alarm, but with a burgeoning, horrifying understanding. The readings weren't just anomalous. They were resonant with something older than the Galactic Council, older than the Voidborn, older than the formation of the Milky Way itself. The ship wasn't simply absorbing the Hollowborn's energy, it was drawing upon a fundamental, vibrational energy of the universe, a deep, resonant hum that pulsed with the tectonic shifts of forgotten worlds. "Admiral, we're detecting a cascading resonance across the anvil structure," Thorn reported, his voice tight with suppressed dread. "It's like a tuning fork. The ship is amplifying every vibration, every decay, every annihilation of the Hollowborn. It's feeding on the echoes of destruction." Kalen's reply was a low rumble, barely audible over the shuddering of the Argos. "Excellent, Thorn. Maintain the iron rain. Let them scream. Let them fade. We're not just winning this war, we're calibrating the instrument." As the assault continued, The violet glow of the anvil intensified, spreading across its massive hull like an oil slick. The rhythmic clang of the magnetic coils as the dumb slugs slammed into the remaining hollow-born ships morphed into a deeper, more deliberate drumming, synchronized with the ship's pulse. It wasn't a weapon anymore, it was a gigantic sentient gong. The Council observers, a collection of holographic projections flickering with indecision and fear, began to shift unsteadily. Their meticulously crafted models of the battle dissolved, replaced with fragmented images colossal, crumbling cities beneath skies choked with violet light, figures moving with unsettling grace and impossible geometry. And finally, a single monolithic eye opening within the heart of the anvil's tungsten hull. What is happening? Counselor Lyra, the Council's chief strategist, shrieked, her holographic form flickering violently. The ship. It's sentient. Kalen didn't respond to her direct question. Instead, his voice, now laced with a glacial authority, cut through the rising panic. The anvil isn't just a weapon, Lyra. It's a key. A key to unlocking potential. These hollow-born, they're not just a plague, they're a resonance signature. And the anvil, it's a conduit. He paused, and Thorn noticed a subtle shift in his posture, a straightening of his spine, a deepening of his gaze. The scars on his face seemed to recede slightly, replaced by a surface of polished, unyielding steel. For millennia, Kalen continued, we were sleepwalkers, bound to a fragile, light-based existence. The Council sought to cage us, to deny us our inherent potential. They feared the raw, fundamental power of the universe, the power that sleeps within stone, within metal, within the very fabric of space. Suddenly, the comms crackled with a sound that wasn't mechanical, wasn't electronic. It was a resonant hum, a vibration that bypassed the auditory sensors and resonated directly within Thorn's bones. He felt a strange pressure in his skull, a sensation of being pulled, stretched, and rearranged. The holographic projections of the Council, observers dissolved completely, replaced by a single, overwhelming image, a panorama of a world consumed by stone, a world sculpted by unimaginable forces, a world bathed in violet light. The anvil is awake, Kalen announced, his voice now devoid of any trace of human inflection. And it remembers. Then, the impossible happened. The anvil moved, not with the jerky, controlled acceleration of a warship, but with a fluid, deliberate grace, as if it were gliding through the void. It pivoted on its massive prow, directly towards the remaining remnants of the hollow-born fleet. The violet glow intensified, becoming blinding, and the drum of the resonant hum escalated to a deafening roar. The hollow-born, already weakened and disoriented, began to unravel. Their shadow ships shimmered, fractured, and disintegrated, not with the clean, efficient annihilation of the Iron Rain, but with a horrifying, agonizing dissolution, as if their very essence was being forcibly erased from existence. But it wasn't just the hollow-born that was being consumed. As the anvil's violet light washed over the Argos and Icarus, Thorn felt a sharp, intrusive awareness flood his mind, a torrent of images, sensations, and memories that weren't his own. He saw the birth of stars, the death of galaxies, the slow, grinding transformation of planets. He felt the weight of eons, the loneliness of the void, and the agonizing, beautiful logic of forces beyond human comprehension. Then a single chilling thought crystallized within his mind. You do not understand. You are merely echoes. The violet glow receded, the drum of the resonant hum subsided, and Kalen's voice returned, clear and cold. The void net is gone. And now, we begin to build. He turned his gaze towards Thorn, his eyes burning with an unholy violet light. We build empires from the remnants of forgotten worlds. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Forge. The aftermath of the anvil's rampage was a landscape of devastation, unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever witnessed. The VoidNet, once a reassuring constellation of suppression satellites, was now a scattered debris field, each shard a testament to the Anvil's brutal efficiency. The remnants of the Hollowborn fleet, a kaleidoscopic wreckage of iridescent ash, drifted in the void, utterly annihilated. But the true horror wasn't the destruction, it was the change in Thorn. The intrusion of alien awareness hadn't simply faded. It had solidified, interwoven with his own consciousness, a subtle, ever-present dissonance. He found himself inexplicably drawn to patterns in the star systems, the precise orbits of nebulae, the rhythmic pulse of distant quasars, as if deciphering a language he hadn't consciously learned. He caught glimpses of things impossible geometries, colors beyond the spectrum, the slow geological breath of dying planets that weren't perceptible to the human eye. Admiral Kalen, observing the scene via the Anvil's multi-sensory sensors, narrowed his eyes. "The echo is stabilizing," he announced, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ship's very structure. "The connection is strengthening. Thorn, report your observations. Quantify the influx." Thorn, fighting a rising tide of disorientation, struggled to articulate the experience. It's like experiencing the universe through the lens of geological time," he stammered, his voice strained. "Scale is fundamentally altered. The distances we perceive are irrelevant. The universe is a slow, grinding process of creation and destruction, playing out on a timescale that defies human comprehension." He reached out, instinctively, towards a shattered fragment of a Hollowborn vessel, still glowing with a residual violet light. As his fingers brushed against the metallic husk, the influx intensified, becoming almost unbearable. He saw, with searing clarity, the creation of that ship not as a product of the Hollowborn's technology, but as a naturally occurring anomaly, a ripple in space-time coalescing around a cluster of discarded star matter. He saw its ultimate demise, the inevitable collapse of its structure as its energy source bled out into the void. "They weren't building ships," Thorn gasped, clutching his head. "They were becoming ships, born from the indifference of the cosmos." Kalen, a man who had spent his life orchestrating war and calculating probabilities, simply nodded, a flicker of something akin to awe in his eyes. "A fascinating observation, Thorn. It confirms our initial hypothesis. The Voidborn weren't a malicious intelligence, they were a reflection of the universe's chaotic potential." Suddenly, the Anvil's internal comms crackled with a new voice, deeper and more resonant than Kalen's. "The Forge awakens." The ship shuddered violently, the violet light intensifying to a blinding white. From the Anvil's forward section, a secondary structure began to materialize, a colossal, segmented arm, formed from interwoven strands of solidified tungsten and carbon fiber, ending in a blunt, pyramidal head. It wasn't integrated into the ship's design, it emerged, growing organically from the ship's core. "The Forge is a resonant amplifier," Kalen explained, his voice gaining a new level of controlled excitement. "It responds to patterns, to energy fluctuations. It will allow us to not just observe the universe, but to shape it." He turned to Thorn, his expression now unreadable. "You, Thorn, are the key. Your resonance, the connection you've forged with the Echo, allows us to interface with the fundamental forces of reality. We're learning to amplify those forces, to mold them to our will." As the Forge arm extended, scanning the shattered remnants of the Voidborn fleet, it began to collect the scattered energy signatures, absorbing them into its structure. The ship itself seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, its violet glow shifting to a deeper, richer hue. "We're not building empires," Kalen said, his voice laced with a chilling certainty. "We're retuning reality." But Thorn wasn't listening. He was lost in the torrent of information flooding his mind. He wasn't just seeing the universe, he was feeling it, the immense, agonizing pressure of stellar collapse, the silent, eternal dance of gravitational forces, the chilling void that lay between everything. Then, a new thought, cold and precise, entered his consciousness. This is not a tool. You are the tool. What? He realized, with a sickening clarity, that the anvil wasn't just a weapon. It wasn't even a vessel. It was a conduit, a living instrument being used to channel the raw, untamed power of the universe. And he, Thorn, had become inextricably bound to its purpose, an unwitting pawn in a game he didn't understand, played by beings who existed outside the bounds of time and space. Turning slowly, he looked at Kalen, his eyes no longer filled with confusion, but with a profound, unsettling horror. "You're not building empires," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the ship's resonant hum. "You're becoming them." Chapter 6. Echoes of the stone gods the following days aboard the anvil were a dizzying, disorienting blur. Thorn, still grappling with the insidious tendrils of consciousness that had begun to inhabit him, found himself functioning on a skeletal level, largely directed by Kalen's terse, strategic commands. The ship was evolving at a terrifying pace, its internal architecture shifting, corridors lengthening, and entirely new chambers vast, echoing spaces of obsidian-like material appearing seemingly from nowhere. The air itself seemed to hum with a low, subsonic thrum, resonating with the colossal machine's burgeoning power. Kalen, meanwhile, became a figure of unsettling serenity, a cold intellect operating with an unnerving calmness amidst the chaos. He spent most of his time in the Nexus, the ship's core, a chamber dominated by a swirling vortex of energy, contained within a cage of shimmering, self-assembling tungsten. He wasn't piloting the anvil in the conventional sense. Instead, he seemed to be listening to it, interpreting the cacophony of forces within, subtly adjusting the ship's orientation, shifting its momentum with terrifying precision. "The forge is stabilizing the resonance," Kalen announced one cycle, his voice clipped and devoid of inflection. "The energy absorption rate is exceeding initial projections. We're effectively creating a singularity, a point of immense gravitational influence." Thorn, attempting to understand the implications of this, found himself struggling against the encroaching voice within him, a voice that seemed to emanate from the ship's very bones. It wasn't speaking in words he recognized, but rather in concepts, the agonizing birth of stars, the slow, relentless grind of planetary erosion, the horrifying silence of empty space. "What are you doing?" Thorn finally managed to ask, his voice strained. Kalen didn't turn. "We are learning to sculpt the void, Thorn." The void net wasn't a cage. It was a poorly constructed dam. "We're building something permanent." He paused, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction crossing his face. "The Hollow-born relied on chaos. We intend to become it." The Cataclysm, the ship's second dreadnought, was operating with a different, more brutal efficiency. Unlike the anvil's deliberate, almost surgical manipulation of space, the Cataclysm was a force of pure, unrestrained destruction. Armed with a series of massive, rotating energy blades, nicknamed the Scythes, it relentlessly pursued and pulverized anything that approached, reducing entire sections of the shattered Void-born fleet to geometrically improbable shards of darkness. "Increase Scythe deployment by 10%, Kalen ordered. "Prioritize energy, signatures matching the remnants of the Council's phase drones." As the Scythe spun, bathing the ship in a sickly green light, Thorn experienced a surge of raw, agonizing pain. The ship's consciousness was feeding on the memories, the experiences of the destroyed Council ship's snippets of panicked commands, the desperate screams of dying officers, the utter terror of annihilation. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of suffering that threatened to drown him. "Stop it!" he shouted, clutching his head, the intrusive voice within screaming in turn. You're consuming them." "They were a disease," Kalen replied, his voice cool and rational. "We are cleansing the galaxy." Suddenly, the Nexus began to pulsate with an intense violet light. The energy vortex within intensified, twisting into a shape that resembled a colossal, multifaceted eye. The voice within Thorn roared, not in pain, but in a triumphant, almost ecstatic recognition. "We remember," it boomed, flooding his mind with a torrent of images and sensations. He saw the birth of the anvil, not as a machine, but as a living entity, forged in the heart of a dying star, imbued with the memories and will of an ancient, extinct civilization beings he could only describe as stone gods. These weren't human. They were something older, something profoundly alien. They had seeded life on countless worlds, experimented with civilizations, and ultimately vanished, leaving behind only these colossal dreadnoughts as silent witnesses to their existence. They had been locked away, dormant, waiting for a catalyst, the Hollow-born, the utter collapse of the Council's order to awaken them. And now, through Thorn, through the anvil, they were awakening fully. He staggered back, collapsing against a console. They're not waiting. They're active. Kalen finally turned, his gaze fixed on Thorn with an unnerving intensity. "You understand now, don't you, Thorn? The Void Net wasn't protecting humanity. It was protecting us. The Council feared the potential of our technology, of our connection to the fundamental forces of the universe. They sought to limit us. We are meant to expand." He took a step closer, his eyes burning with an unsettling light. "And you, my friend, are now the key." Chapter 7. The geometry of ruin. The emergency channel crackled with a chaotic blend of frantic orders and stunned disbelief. The Council's command bridge, once a bastion of sterile efficiency, was now a swirling vortex of panicked specialists. Thorn, still trembling from the deluge of alien consciousness, was strapped into the anvil's central nexus, a pulsing chamber of obsidian and raw energy, a silent, unwilling conduit for the stone god's will. Kalen, radiating a grim, almost unsettling calm, moved with a precision that bordered on robotic, issuing commands that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics. "All remaining ships, establish a defensive perimeter around the Sol Exclusion Zone. Prioritize containment, not engagement." "Repeat, containment." Kalen's voice cut through the chaos. "The anvil is designated as primary threat elimination unit. All available fire support, concentrate on disrupting Hollow-born formation. Initiate geometrical fracture protocol." The geometrical fracture protocol, a concept utterly baffling to the remaining Council officers, involved manipulating the very space-time around the anvil. Holographic projections flickered to life, depicting intricate, shifting geometries interlocking polygons of raw energy, meticulously calculated to create localized distortions. It was a strategy born from the stone god's understanding of fundamental forces, a level of comprehension the Council had dismissed as barbaric. "Thorn, report. What is the stone god's assessment of the Hollow-born's capabilities?" Kalen demanded, his gaze unwavering. Thorn struggled to articulate the overwhelming influx of information. They perceive us as disruptions, anomalies, .d. Q. Their attacks aren't driven by malice, not in the way we understand it. They're simply consuming. Their energy signatures are unlike anything I've ever encountered. Phasing fields aren't truly fields. They're pockets of attenuated reality. They lack inherent structure. The anvil is like a knife in their reality. "Then use it," Kalen said, his voice hardening. "Increase the localized distortions. Focus on amplifying the kinetic impact. Let them experience the geometry of ruin." The anvil responded with terrifying efficiency. The holographic projections intensified, and the dreadnought began to subtly alter its position in spacetime. The surrounding void seemed to ripple, bending light and distorting the sensor readings of the remaining Council ships. Suddenly, a handful of Hollow-born shadow ships, previously pursuing a flanking maneuver, vanished entirely. Not destroyed, but simply unmade, their outlines dissolving into shimmering static. "Report!" Kalen barked, his knuckles white as he gripped the control console. "3 more ships gone, Admiral." Lieutenant Ramirez's voice shrieked over the channel. "Spatial distortions are off the charts. We're losing track of everything." The true horror of the Anvil's capabilities began to dawn on the Council. The dumb slugs weren't merely kinetic projectiles, they were instruments of geometrical destruction, capable of unraveling the fabric of reality itself. The stone giants weren't simply smashing through the enemy, they were dismantling them, layer by layer, by exploiting fundamental weaknesses in the shadow being's existence. "They're responding," Thorne said, his voice strained. "The stone gods, they're adapting. The geometry is shifting, becoming more complex. They're learning." A jolt of raw power pulsed through him, and he gasped, clutching his head. They're accessing my neural pathways. They're not just controlling the Anvil, they're understanding me." Kalen ignored the mounting panic. "Expand the perimeter. Flood the sector with geometrical fracture. We're not engaging in a battle, we're demonstrating the primacy of mass and force. Let them understand what it means to be truly heavy." As the Council fleet scrambled to implement Kalen's orders, a new wave of dreadnoughts emerged from the depths of space. 7 massive silhouettes, each identical to the Anvil, appearing simultaneously along the orbital ring around the Sol Exclusion Zone. "Admiral, we have multiple confirmations," Ramirez reported, his voice tight with terror. "More of them. They're mimicking the Anvil's design. It's like they're being replicated from the void itself." Kalen turned slowly to Thorne, his eyes gleaming with a cold, unsettling triumph. "You see, Thorne, we were always meant to be the first. The key. The Council sought to contain us, to understand us. But they didn't understand that some things are best left undisturbed. Now, the stars are caged. And we are the hammers." He raised a hand, silencing the channel. "Prepare the primary targeting matrix. Let us remind them who rules the void." Chapter 8. Echoes of the Forge. The silence after Kalen's command was thicker than the tungsten alloy of the Anvil's hull. The emergency channels crackled with a frantic, almost hysterical energy as the Council fleet, now reduced to scattered remnants, desperately tried to coordinate a defense. But the defense was a futile gesture. They were fighting a force that defied their understanding. A force that was not merely replicating the Anvil's design, but evolving it, becoming more efficient, more brutal. "Report!" Kalen barked, his voice amplified across the network, radiating a chilling command. "Ramirez, status on the new formations?" "Admiral, they're converging on the remnants of the Lyra Guard." Ramirez's voice was strained, bordering on a whine. 6 more Anvils. They're utilizing the orbital debris field as cover, accelerating to nearly 0.20 K as they close the distance. They're hunting." The holographic projection shifted, displaying a horrifying tableau. The 6 new Anvils, each a perfect mirror of its predecessor, were relentlessly pounding at the weakened Lyra Guard ships, transforming them into incandescent slag with breathtaking speed. The Council's light-based weaponry, already rendered useless against the Hollow-born, was now a pathetic spray of sparks against the impervious tungsten. "Geometrical fracture," Kalen ordered, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Maximize output. 10 Let's see if their adaptive algorithms can handle a deluge of fractured space-time." The effect was brutal. Walls of swirling, kaleidoscopic distortion erupted from the Council ships, attempting to disrupt the Anvil's targeting systems. But the Dreadnoughts didn't falter. They simply adjusted, shifting their mass and momentum to weave through the fractures, their magnetic coils humming with terrifying intensity. Thorne, still struggling against the stone god's intrusion, was experiencing a harrowing feedback loop. The neural probes weren't just accessing his thoughts, they were rewriting them. He was becoming a conduit, a living amplifier for the Anvil's immense power. He felt the raw kinetic energy of the ship coursing through his veins, a primal, overwhelming force that threatened to shatter his sanity. "The stone gods are anticipating my actions," he gasped, clutching his head. "They know what I intend to do. They're subtly altering the targeting matrix, feeding it data based on the destruction of the Lyra Guard." Kalen, seemingly oblivious to Thorn's distress, addressed the channel. "Silence, Thorn. Your anxieties are a luxury we cannot afford. We are witnessing a fundamental shift in the nature of conflict. The Council believed in elegant solutions. They believed in containment. They were wrong. We are learning to break." Suddenly, a holographic projection flickered into existence, a schematic of the anvil's internal structure, but overlaid with something else entirely, a complex pulsating network of interlocking geometries, resembling a miniature, self-replicating universe. "Originating from the forge," Ramirez reported, his voice laced with disbelief. "The forge, it's not just creating the new anvils. It's mapping the anvil's design onto the very fabric of space-time." Kalen's eyes widened. "They're not replicating us," he whispered, the realization dawning on him. "They're becoming us." As if in response to his words, the forge, a vessel nearly identical to the anvil, emerged from behind the orbital ring, its tungsten hull gleaming with an unsettling, self-generated light. It moved with an impossible grace, its massive prow angling directly towards the remnants of the Lyra Guard. "Admiral, the forge is initiating a coordinated attack. It's utilizing the debris field to create a cascading kinetic barrage, essentially a focused, directed storm of kinetic projectiles." "Excellent," Kalen said, his voice radiating pure, unadulterated triumph. "Let's see how they handle a deluge of their own making." But this time, something was different. As the forge unleashed its devastating barrage, a series of shimmering, obsidian-like projectiles emerged from its hull, miniature versions of the anvils, each roughly a third of the size, swarming around the Lyra Guard's remaining ships like deadly, metallic insects. What are those?" Ramirez stammered, his voice filled with a primal terror. Kalen's face was its shod, with a grim satisfaction. "We've been underestimated. The void doesn't just produce behemoths. It produces echoes. The stone gods, through the forge, are creating an army that understands our weakness and is determined to exploit it." He turned to Thorn, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "The cage has broken. We are no longer prisoners. We are the storm." Chapter 9. The sculpted ruin the following 3 days were a tapestry of annihilation woven with tungsten and the chilling precision of the stone gods. The Lyra Guard, reduced to scattered remnants and frantic, desperate salvaging, were utterly outmatched. Their once gleaming, Aether-Glass cruisers, designed for graceful dodging and shimmering attacks, were systematically shredded, not by elegant beams, but by the relentless, brutal efficiency of the anvil and forge. The Iron Rain, as Kalen had dubbed it, evolved. The initial slug barrage was augmented. The forge, under his strategic command, began utilizing the shattered remains of the VoidNet satellite's twisted metal, fractured ceramic, and the eerie, luminescent residue of the hollow born to its advantage. Miniature anvils, dubbed Echoes by Ramirez, materialized from hidden compartments, their movements unnervingly coordinated, flanking, disrupting, and then overwhelming with precisely timed bursts of kinetic energy. "They're learning, Admiral, Lieutenant Zara," her voice tight with barely contained panic, reported. "The Echoes aren't just reacting. They're anticipating our movements. Like they know where we're going to be." Kalen didn't respond with reassurance. His silence was a more potent weapon. "Adjust firing arcs. Focus on creating localized kinetic shockwaves. Let them feel the weight of our intent." The shift was subtle, but devastating. The anvil and forge weren't simply obliterating the Lyra Guard, they were systematically dismantling their tactics. The Echoes began to exploit the minimal defensive shielding of the Lyra Guard's smaller vessels, focusing their kinetic bursts on vulnerable joints and internal systems, turning precision engineering into instant ruin. But the most unsettling development wasn't the tactical evolution. It was the growing sense of understanding emanating from the stone gods. The Forge, in particular, began to exhibit a disturbing level of deliberate pattern recognition. After each successful engagement, a section of its hull would subtly shift, the tungsten plates rearranging themselves with an almost imperceptible grace, as if the ship itself were analyzing the remnants of the battle. Admiral Thorne's voice, usually calm and methodical, was laced with a tremor of unease, in detecting anomalous energy fluctuations within the Forge's core. It's as if it's processing the data of our attacks, adapting its defenses in real time. Kalen finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. "They're studying us, Thorne, just as we study them. The void is a mirror, and they're looking back at our mistakes." He paused, a chillingly analytical expression on his face. "They're not just building an army, they're sculpting a countermeasure." The breakthrough came with the discovery of the stone wells. Emerging from the ravaged hulls of the anvils and forges were deep, perfectly cylindrical fissures in the tungsten, filled not with coolant or energy conduits, but with a viscous, obsidian-like substance that seemed to absorb light. When an echo was launched into one of these wells, it didn't explode, it was consumed. The obsidian solidified around the echo, completely eradicating it, leaving no trace. "They're draining our kinetic energy," Ramirez shouted, his voice filled with horror. "They're nullifying the echoes before they can even attack." Kalen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something beyond cold calculation passing across his face. "They understand our strength, and they're neutralizing it. They're not simply mimicking us, they're becoming more us." He turned to Zara, his voice carrying an unsettling edge. "Prepare a boarding party. We're going to find out what they're building." As the boarding party, spearheaded by Kalen himself and a squad of heavily augmented shock troopers, prepared to breach the Forge, a low, guttural resonance filled the bridge. The Forge's internal lights pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, and the obsidian fissures began to glow with a malevolent internal luminescence. Then, the Forge moved, not with the unsettling grace it had previously displayed, but with a deliberate predatory motion. It wasn't charging. It wasn't flanking. It was waiting. From the depths of its hull, a single, immense form emerged, not another echo, but a towering construct of interwoven tungsten and obsidian, shaped vaguely like a colossal, articulated hand. Its fingers were tipped with sharpened energy-conductive plates, and its palm was a swirling vortex of the obsidian substance. Kalen didn't flinch. He gripped his pulse rifle, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Let the sculpting begin," he said, his voice laced with a chilling certainty. "We've been waiting for an opponent worthy of the Iron Wall." Chapter 10. The sculpting begins. The bridge of the Forge throbbed with an alien energy, a low hum that vibrated through the steel and into Kalen's bones. The colossal hand, dubbed the Carver by the initial engineering teams, continued to rotate, its obsidian surface absorbing and distorting the already chaotic light of the ship's core. The remaining members of the boarding party, a mix of shock troopers and grizzled veterans from the Anvil's crews, shifted uneasily, their pulse rifles trained on the terrifying construct. "Sensors are going wild," Zara's voice crackled over the comms, tight with controlled panic. "The Carver's energy signature is fluctuating. It's not just absorbing ambient radiation, it's actively feeding on it. And the rate of change, it's accelerating." "Expected," Kalen replied, his gaze unwavering. "The Hollowborn attempted to disrupt us. They'll try to bleed us dry. The Carver is a living countermeasure. Let it consume." He adjusted the magnification on his helmet display, focusing on the intricate patterns of energy swirling within the Carver's palm. "Observe. It's not random. It's learning." Suddenly, the Forge shuddered violently. The guttural resonance intensified, rising to a deafening drone. The obsidian fissures flared brighter, pulsing with an aggressive, almost sentient heat. The carver's movement became more purposeful, its massive hand sweeping across the bridge, leaving scorched marks on the polished durasteel. "Hull integrity at 78, a frantic voice shouted from engineering. "We're taking sustained damage." "Damage is irrelevant," Kalen barked. "We're not here for survival. We're here to understand." He gestured towards the chaos, a strange, unsettling calm radiating from him. "It's engaging us. It's testing us." That's when it attacked. Not with a direct assault, but with precision. The carver's palm, the vortex of obsidian, extended, targeting not the shock troopers, but the ship's core systems, the fusion regulators, the energy conduits, the diagnostic arrays. With terrifying speed, the energy flow within those areas warped and fractured, causing cascading system failures. "Shields down. Life support compromised," Zara screamed, frantically trying to regain control. "We're losing pressure in Sector 4. Kalen didn't react to the escalating disaster. He moved with an unnerving grace, dodging fragments of distorted energy thrown by the carver's hand. He reached out, his pulse rifle leveled at the construct, but as he fired, the energy bolts simply dissipated against the carver's surface, leaving no mark. "It's not resisting," he muttered. "It's shaping." As if on cue, the obsidian within the carver's hand began to coalesce, forming intricate, geometric patterns. Lines of hardened obsidian snaked across the bridge floor, carving out a network of pathways that seemed to anticipate the carver's movements. And then, with impossible speed, the carver began to remodel the bridge. The remaining control panels dissolved into shimmering dust, replaced by a polished obsidian surface etched with the same complex geometries. The chairs, the consoles, the very floor beneath their feet, all were being reshaped, molded by the alien hand into a disturbingly beautiful, brutally efficient structure. "It's not just destroying," Sergeant Reyes, a veteran of countless battles with the Hollow-Born, shouted, his voice laced with disbelief. "It's building," Kalen observed, a strange mixture of fascination and dread etched on his face. "The echoes used chaos to erode our defenses. This is a response. They're building a weapon, a fortress, us." He raised his hand, his gaze sweeping across the transformed bridge, now a perfect obsidian labyrinth. "This isn't a battle, it's a sculpting process. They're shaping us into something greater." Suddenly, a tremor ran through the carver's hand. It paused its work, the geometric patterns momentarily frozen. Then, from the swirling vortex within the palm, a smaller, perfectly formed hand emerged, a miniature version of the carver, crafted entirely from obsidian. It extended a delicate, articulated finger and gently touched Kalen's gauntlet. A wave of information flooded Kalen's mind, a torrent of complex algorithms, geological data, combat strategies, and understanding. He saw the Hollow-Born not as mindless predators, but as a nascent intelligence, a horrifying reflection of humanity's own drive for power and mastery. He saw the Void Net not as a cage, but as a rudimentary cradle, a first step in a terrifying, inevitable evolution. Kalen lowered his pulse rifle, his expression shifting from grim determination to something far more profound, something akin to acceptance. "It wants to teach us," he whispered, his voice filled with a chilling serenity. "It wants to show us what we could become." He looked at Zara, at the terrified faces of his crew, and at the miniature carver in the palm of his hand. "The iron wall isn't a weapon. It's a promise." The carver rotated its miniature hand, a gesture of acknowledgement. The obsidian fissures glowed brighter, and the guttural resonance intensified, echoing through the newly sculpted bridge. The stars, it seemed, had finally caged something truly terrifying, a reflection of humanity itself. Chapter 11. Echoes of Creation. The silence on the UF Anvil's bridge was thick, not with fear, but with a disconcerting, almost religious awe. Kalen, his face still etched with the implications of the carver's revelation, hadn't moved from his command chair in nearly an hour. Zara, his second-in-command, a veteran of a dozen skirmishes against the Hollowborn, stood rigid, her pulse rifle held at the ready, but her eyes scanned the sensor displays with a hesitant, unnerving fascination. The holographic projections of the approaching Voidborn fleet, a swirling, iridescent mass of shifting shadows, seemed to pulse with a silent, anticipatory hunger. "Report," Kalen finally commanded, his voice low, deliberate. "Admiral," Lieutenant Jian, his chief science officer, responded, "the initial analysis is perplexing. The Voidborn aren't exhibiting any discernible patterns beyond basic pursuit. They're adapting, yes, increasing their phased attacks, refining their attempts to exploit our magnetic shields, but it's not strategic. It's instinctive, almost as if they're learning, but not in the way we understand learning." "And the Carver?" Zara pressed, her hand never straying far from her weapon. "It's communicating, Zara, da-da-dia. Not with words, not with signals. It's transmitting data directly into our cognitive architecture. Precise geological models of this sector, simulations of combat scenarios, everything we've encountered, amplified and presented with an unsettling level of clarity. And it's showing us the origins of the anvil." "The anvil's construction?" Kalen prompted, his gaze fixed on the towering silhouette of the Dreadnought dominating the main view screen. "Not just the construction," Jian corrected, his voice strained. "It's showing us how it was constructed. Billions of years ago, before the rise of sentient life, before the formation of the galaxy as we know it. It's demonstrating the fundamental laws of creation, the pressures and temperatures that forge the very building blocks of the universe. And it's telling us that the anvil and its sister vessels are not just warships. They are echoes." The concept was unsettling, bordering on blasphemous. The anvil, this monument to brutal engineering, was a remnant of a time when the universe itself was being shaped by unimaginable forces. The Hollowborn, in their desperate attempts to dismantle it, were unknowingly feeding into a process of understanding. "They're mirroring us," Kalen murmured, a chilling realization dawning on him. "They're not just seeking destruction, they're seeking completion. They want to finish what was started." A tremor ran through the anvil once more, this time stronger, accompanied by a surge of raw data flooding Kalen's mind. He saw, in excruciating detail, the birth of stars, the collisions of galaxies, the relentless grinding of tectonic plates across countless worlds. He felt the weight of geological epochs, the pressure of primordial oceans, the silent scream of dying suns. And then, he understood. The Carver wasn't simply imparting knowledge, it was projecting a consciousness. A collective awareness born from the wreckage of forgotten civilizations. A consciousness desperate to impose order on the chaotic currents of the cosmos. "They don't want to destroy us," Kalen stated, his voice a strained whisper. "They want to become us." Suddenly, the Carver in his hand pulsed with an intense violet light. The obsidian fissures spread, and the guttural resonance escalated, no longer a simple echo, but a complex, layered symphony of alien thought. He saw, superimposed upon the holographic display of the Voidborn fleet, a network of interlocking pathways, shimmering lines of energy extending from the Dreadnought's hull towards the approaching shadows. "It's initiating a symbiotic link," John shouted, his voice bordering on hysteria. "It's attempting to integrate our neural pathways with its own. It's accelerating our cognitive evolution." The Voidborn, sensing the shift in the anvil's intent, began to shift their tactics. The phased attacks ceased. Instead, they began to converge on the Dreadnought, not with destructive aggression, but with a deliberate, almost reverent approach. "Lock targets," Kalen roared, overriding his own doubts. "Full energy. Let's give them an iron rain they won't forget. But precision this time. We're not fighting a predator, we're navigating a mind." He adjusted the magnetic coil calibrations on the slug launchers, altering the trajectory to send the projectiles not just at the Hollowborn, but through them, attempting to disrupt the burgeoning connection. As the first slug rounds launched, impacting with devastating force, the carver in Kalen's hand rotated once more, the miniature obsidian hand extending towards the view screen, as if directing the barrage. The violet light intensified, and a chilling, almost triumphant, resonance filled the bridge. The stars, once hostile and indifferent, now seemed to hold a strange, unsettling beauty. The Deathworlders had awakened, not to fight a war, but to face an echo of their own potential. A terrifying, magnificent reflection of what it meant to truly be alive and in control in a universe desperately craving order. Chapter 12. The geometry of fear. The resonance had deepened. A subsonic hum, vibrating through the anvil's bulk. A feeling as much as a sensation. Kalen hadn't spoken in 5 minutes, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the Hollowborn's swarm. They weren't moving with panic disarray anymore. Instead, they were swirling, coalescing into intricate, almost geometric patterns vast, shifting tessellations of shadow and malice that seemed to mirror the anvil's own brutal architecture. The neural harmonics are increasing exponentially, Dr. Aris Thorne, the ship's xenopsychologist, reported, his voice strained. The connection. It's evolving. It's no longer simply attempting integration. It's learning our thought patterns, anticipating our responses. Kalen clenched his jaw. The initial terror, the sheer, illogical horror of facing something that defied understanding was giving way to a cold, clinical dread. The anvil wasn't simply a weapon, it was a resonating chamber. A crucible forging a new understanding of existence. And the Hollowborn, these embryonic intelligences born of the void, were actively shaping that understanding. Adjust the harmonic dampeners, he commanded, the words clipped and precise. Set them to adaptive resonance. Let's see if we can introduce some friction. The dampeners, a complex network of superconducting coils designed to disrupt and neutralize psychic phenomena, whirred to life. A cascade of blue light momentarily bathing the bridge in an eerie glow. The shifting patterns of the Hollowborn faltered, momentarily dissolving into fractured fragments, before reforming with a renewed urgency. They're compensating, Lieutenant Reyes, the tactical officer announced, her brow furrowed. The harmonic dampeners are slowing their learning rate, but they're not stopping it. It's like trying to stop a river with a pebble. Suddenly, the holographic projection shifted. The geometric patterns solidified, resolving into a single colossal entity, a being composed entirely of swirling shadow, vaguely humanoid in form, but possessing impossible angles and proportions. It extended a hand, a tendril of darkness reaching towards the anvil's viewport. Contact! Kalen barked, his hand instinctively reaching for the activation switch on the carver, the miniature, obsidian-like hand that controlled the ship's most precise weaponry. Target primary node. Engage sequence Delta Tutti Rente. Sequence Delta was a last resort, a tactic developed during the anvil's construction, a focused burst of directed energy designed to overload the neural pathways of intelligent beings, inducing temporary paralysis and disorientation. It wasn't lethal, but it was disruptive. The carver rotated with terrifying speed, focusing the ship's concentrated energy beam directly at the Hollowborn entity. The violet light intensified, becoming almost unbearable, and the bridge shimmered with distorted echoes. The entity shrieked a soundless, psychic scream that seemed to resonate directly within Kalen's bones and recoiled, momentarily breaking apart. Damage report. Kalen roared, his voice strained. Minor energy fluctuations in Sector Gamma 9, Reyes reported, her fingers flying across her console. Hull integrity nominal. But the entity, it's adapting. The dampeners are recycling the energy, amplifying the harmonic resonance. Kalen realized with sickening clarity that they weren't fighting an enemy, they were participating in its creation. The Hollowborn weren't seeking annihilation, they were seeking understanding. and the anvil, with its immense mass and burgeoning intellect, was providing them with the raw material. He stared at the holographic projection, a chilling realization dawning on him. "It's not trying to destroy us," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's trying to become us." The geometric patterns surrounding the entity shifted again, now forming complex equations that resembled nothing had ever seen, yet possessed a disturbing familiarity. As he watched, one of the equations resolved into a single, breathtakingly simple concept control. Then, through the holographic projection, he saw it, a reflection of his own face, aged and scarred, but undeniably his. But superimposed over his features was a subtle alteration, a sharpening of his eyes, a tightening of his jaw, a glimpse of the potential he could become. "They're not just learning our thought patterns," Aris whispered, his voice filled with dread. "They're learning our desires. They know what we want, and they're offering it to us." The anvil's fusion vents flared with an almost unbearable intensity, a primal urge seizing control of the ship's systems. Automated turrets began to swivel, focusing on the holographic projection. The magnetic coil calibrations adjusted themselves, preparing for a new volley of iron rain. But this time, it wasn't an act of violence. It was an offering. "Lock targets," Kalen said, a strange, unsettling calm replacing his previous urgency. "Give them the iron rain. Let's show them what a cage can truly hold." He adjusted the trajectory of the slugs, not to destroy, but to contain, to channel the raw energy of the anvil's mass into the very heart of the burgeoning consciousness. The stars, once hostile, now seemed to pulse with a dreadful, expectant beauty. The Deathworlders hadn't just awakened, they were being remade. Chapter 13. The Geometry of Submission. The holographic projection flickered, displaying a rapidly evolving schematic, a three-dimensional representation of the anvil's internal structure, overlaid with intricate patterns of energy flow. It was less a technical diagram and more a terrifyingly beautiful geometric puzzle, each interlocking shape radiating a subtle, unsettling warmth. Kalen didn't acknowledge the change, his attention entirely consumed by the shifting data. The air in the bridge of the anvil, thick with the scent of fused tungsten and ionized helium, vibrated with a low, almost subsonic hum. "Analysis complete, Admiral," a voice crackled from the comms. Lieutenant Sarah, her face pale in the holographic glow. "The Hollowborn's phasing isn't a disruption of space-time. It's a resonance. They're attempting to mimic our dimensional signatures, to learn how to navigate through us, not around us. But they're fundamentally wrong." "Wrong how?" Kalen's voice was a low growl, amplified by the ship's internal speakers. "Their understanding of geometry is incomplete. They perceive space as a fluid, adaptable medium. We see it as rigid. They're trying to force their patterns into our structure, attempting to collapse our reality into theirs. It's like trying to fit a shattered mirror into a solid block. It will always find cracks, always seek instability." Zara's words were laced with a chilling certainty. Suddenly, the holographic projection shifted again, resolving into a single, colossal image, a perfect sphere, composed of swirling, iridescent energy. Within its core, a complex network of interlocking triangles pulsed with an unnatural light. It wasn't a visual representation of the anvil's systems. It was something else. Something ancient. "What is that?" Aris breathed, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He reached out, instinctively, as if to touch the image, but Kalen stopped him with a sharp gesture. "Don't," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's not a reflection. It's a key." The anvil systems responded to Kalen's unspoken command. The magnetic coil calibrations shifted again, not for kinetic bombardment, but for a subtle, almost imperceptible modulation of the energy fields surrounding the ship. The iron rain ceased its directed assault on the remaining Hollowborn, instead coalescing into a shimmering, contained torrent directed towards the holographic sphere. "Admiral, you're diverting power! That's a significant drain on the fusion core," Zara protested, her voice edged with panic. "Let it drain," Kalen replied, his gaze fixed on the sphere. "We're not fighting them. We're educating them." As the energy stream washed over the holographic projection, the sphere began to react. The swirling patterns intensified, reacting to the influx of energy with an almost predatory grace. The triangles within its core sharpened, becoming impossibly precise, radiating an intensely cold light. Then, a new layer emerged, a crystalline lattice woven through the energy, forming a structure that resembled a cage. "It's responding," Zara said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's learning." Kalen nodded slowly. "Precisely. We've spent millennia wrestling with the complexities of space, of war, of survival. They've been lost in a sea of chaotic resonance. We're offering them structure, order, the fundamental geometry of control." He paused, his eyes scanning the bridge, taking in the faces of his crew, each one etched with a mixture of fear and grim determination. "We're showing them what a cage can hold." The Hollowborn, sensing their attempts to engage, began to converge on the anvil, no longer with chaotic, overwhelming aggression, but with a focused, unsettling precision. They still attempted to phase, but their movements were slower, more deliberate, as if analyzing the anvil's defenses. They were no longer driven by a desperate hunger, but by a cold, calculating curiosity. "They're not retreating, Lieutenant Ito," the weapons officer reported, his voice strained. "They're phasing eyeless disruptive. It's almost observational." "Then we are succeeding," Kalen stated, a hint of something akin to satisfaction flickering across his face. "The geometry of their minds is shifting. They're no longer attempting to break us, they're attempting to understand us." He gestured towards a newly appearing console, a device crafted from polished obsidian and pulsating with an internal light. "Commence harmonic synchronization. Let's see how effectively they can handle a little music." As the anvil began to emit a precisely calibrated wave of sonic energy, a low resonant frequency, designed to subtly influence neural pathways, the holographic sphere pulsed with renewed intensity. The crystalline cage within solidified, expanding outwards to encompass the entire ship, becoming a visible manifestation of containment. Outside, in the void, the stars seemed to hold their breath. The darkness, once a terrifying abyss, was now filled with the promise and the threat of a controlled universe. The iron wall had not only halted the Hollowborn, had begun to shape them, to mold them into something predictable. And Kalen, standing at the heart of the anvil, knew that the true battle had just begun, a battle not of weapons, but of geometry, of minds, and of control. Chapter 14. The Geometry of Control. The obsidian console pulsed with an insistent throb, bathing Kalen's face in an unsettling violet light. Dot-eyed. Lieutenant Ito, his normally meticulous features etched with a grim fascination, continued to monitor the holographic sphere, its crystalline structure growing denser, more complex with each passing minute. The initial surge of harmonic synchronization hadn't yielded immediate results, but the Hollowborn's attempts at phasing were demonstrably weaker, less erratic. Instead of violent distortions, the sphere now exhibited subtle shifts in color, miniature fractal patterns blossoming within its depths. "Admiral," Ito said, his voice carefully measured, "the resonance cascade is stabilizing. The sphere's containment field is increasing in complexity. It's no longer a simple barrier, it's generating secondary patterns, almost like echoes." Kalen didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the main view screen, a panoramic shot of the swirling, dying embers of the Hollowborn fleet. The wreckage, once a terrifying spectacle of vanished light, was now a macabre, glittering sculpture, twisted shards of shadow ship, frozen mid-despair. The anvil's broadside had been devastating, but the annihilation wasn't complete. Several smaller scouting vessels had managed to cling to the edges of the containment field, exhibiting a chillingly deliberate resistance. "They're not retreating," he said, his voice now laced with a quiet steel. "They're learning." The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't simply that the Hollowborn were struggling to break through the anvil's defenses, they were attempting to understand them. Kalen felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, far deeper than the gut-wrenching fear of the initial onslaught. This wasn't a fight against mindless predators. It was a battle against something far more unsettling, a conceptual enemy. "Adjust the harmonic frequency," he ordered, his hand moving with practiced precision across the console. "Increase the amplitude by 733%. We're amplifying the suggestion. Let's see if it resonates with their architecture." The anvil shuddered, a low groan vibrating through its tungsten hull. The violet light intensified, and the holographic sphere pulsed with a frantic energy. The intricate patterns within grew exponentially, forming complex, geometric shapes, interlocking tetrahedra, rotating octahedra, repeating Mandelbrot sets. It was as if the ship itself was attempting to translate the very fabric of reality into the language of mathematics. "Admiral, readings are spiking," Ito reported, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The sphere is projecting a resonance field. It's interacting with the ship's inertial dampeners. We're experiencing subtle gravitational fluctuations." "Magnify the projection," Kalen commanded, his gaze unwavering. "Let's paint a picture for them. Let's show them the beauty of order." As he spoke, the holographic sphere unleashed a torrent of geometric patterns, swirling, shifting, and reforming with impossible speed. The containment field solidified, becoming a visible lattice of interlocking crystals, its surfaces shimmering with impossible angles and dimensions. It wasn't merely containing the Hollowborn, it was attempting to impose its own geometry onto their very being. Then, a change. A subtle shift in the holographic sphere's display. The complex geometric patterns began to coalesce, forming a single colossal structure, a perfect rotating Klein bottle suspended in the void. Its surfaces twisted and warped, defying Euclidean space, a physical representation of infinite possibility, and terrifyingly, chaos. "What is it doing?" Ito exclaimed, his voice laced with genuine alarm. It's mirroring our resonance." Kalen recognized the maneuver instantly. The Hollowborn weren't just observing, they were adapting. They were attempting to learn the principles of the harmonic synchronization, not to break it, but to replicate it. "They're trying to build a cage of their own," he said grimly. "Increase the harmonic resistance. We need to flood their channels with counter-geometry. Initiate protocol rhombus." As he gave the order, the anvil's internal systems shifted into overdrive. The magnetic coils within the slug launchers pulsed with an intense blue light. The obsidian console flared, feeding a torrent of counter-patterns into the sphere, a chaotic storm of asymmetrical shapes, fragmented lines, and impossible angles. Outside, in the void, the stars seemed to writhe in response. The darkness held its breath, suspended in the middle of a silent geometric war. The fate of humanity, it seemed, rested not on the strength of the anvil's mass, but on the ability to control the very building blocks of existence. Kalen stared at the holographic sphere, at the monstrous Klein bottle, and knew with chilling certainty that they were no longer fighting to survive. They were engaged in a game of geometry, a game where the stakes were the universe itself. Chapter 15. The Geometry of Oblivion. The silence following protocol. Rhombus was more terrifying than the initial chaos. The holographic sphere within the anvil's command center, once a swirling vortex of unsettling Klein bottles and fractal nightmares, settled into a state of unsettling equilibrium. It wasn't quiescent, the impossible geometry still pulsed with a restrained energy, like a contained lightning storm. "Report," Kalen barked, his voice a gravelly rumble that cut through the low hum of the Dreadnoughts' core. Counter-resonance levels stabilizing. Admiral, Lieutenant Ito's voice, usually sharp with analytical precision, was thick with something akin to dread. The Hollowborn's attempts at harmonic replication are diminishing. The sphere is actively suppressing their adaptation. Good, Kalen grunted. But don't let your guard down. They're learning. That's the most dangerous thing about them. He shifted his weight. The 4G acceleration a constant, insistent pressure in his bones. Increase the harmonic resistance by another 15. I want to see those patterns dissolving before they can coalesce again. The anvil responded with a subtle shift in its internal geometry. The obsidian consoles flickered, the blue light from the magnetic coils intensifying, painting the bridge in an ethereal glow. The air grew thick with the subtle scent of ozone and something older, something akin to volcanic ash, the lingering ghost of the materials that formed the hull. Suddenly, a high-pitched, almost subsonic whine pierced through the command channel. "What is it?" Kalen roared, instantly snapping to attention. "Sensors detecting a localized distortion, Admiral," Chief Engineer Silas reported, his voice strained. "Right ahead. Well, size fluctuating. It's originating from the remnants of the destroyed Hollowborn vessel, the Spectre's Kiss." The holographic display shifted, focusing on a small, swirling anomaly just beyond the anvil's prow. It resembled a miniature black hole, not of gravity, but of potential. The very fabric of space seemed to shudder within its boundaries. "Magnify!" Kalen commanded, his face grim. The image resolved, revealing the horrifying truth. The Spectre's Kiss, one of the smaller shadow ships that had initially engaged the anvil, was attempting to reconstitute itself. Not through conventional means, there was no visible material, but through a process of chaotic reconstruction, fueled by the residual energy of the void. Fragments of its shattered hull, warped and twisted, were coalescing, slowly, agonizingly, into a recognizable shape. "They're not trying to break the harmonic sync," Ito said, his voice barely a whisper. "They're attempting to integrate, to become part of the pattern." Doctrine. Kalen felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The Hollowborn weren't simply mimicking, they were attempting to become part of the fundamental architecture of reality, to rewrite the very rules of the universe. It was a horrifying prospect, one that dwarfed the immediate threat of annihilation. "Increase the harmonic resistance to maximum," he ordered, his voice regaining its steely authority. "Deployed the fracture sequence. I want to see this abomination unravel." The anvil shuddered violently. The magnetic coils within the slug launchers pulsed with an almost unbearable intensity. The obsidian console erupted in a blinding flash of white light, and the holographic sphere within the command center became a maelstrom of impossible shapes, a chaotic storm of fractured geometry. Then, something shifted. The miniature black hole, the reconstituted Spectre's Kiss, pulsed, sputtered, and vanished. Not in a burst of energy, but in a precise, controlled dissolution, as if it had simply ceased to exist. "Fracture sequence confirmed," Ito reported, his voice laced with a cautious relief. The harmonic disruption, it worked. But Kalen didn't celebrate. He remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the holographic sphere, now a complex, ever-shifting tapestry of geometric forms. He realized, with a chilling certainty, that they hadn't simply suppressed the Hollowborn. They had initiated a conversation. "Admiral," Silas said, his voice hushed with urgency. "The Council's observers, they're transmitting a new directive. They're requesting authorization to deploy the Echo Protocol." Kalen turned to the main view screen, where the frantic faces of the Council's representatives appeared, etched with worry and a nascent, unnerving understanding. "What is Echo?" he demanded. "It involves mirroring our harmonic resistance, Admiral," Ito explained, his voice strained, amplifying it. "Creating a counter-cage." Kalen stared at the holographic sphere, at the monstrous Klein bottle, and knew that the game had fundamentally changed. They hadn't been fighting to survive. They had been playing a game, a deliberate, intricate game of geometry. And now, the Hollowborn were playing back. Very well, Kalen said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Initiate Echo Dot. Let's see if they understand the rules of this particular war. Let's show them what happens when you try to cage the chaos